Hello everyone and welcome to Game 7 of the 2018 World Chess Championship match between Magnus Carlsen and Fabiano Caruana. 6 games have already been played. The result is 3-3, and now we enter the second half of the match. Carlsen had the white pieces in the previous game, but as we are now in the second half of the match, he will have the white pieces once again. So it's very interesting. Will he once again try to challenge Caruana's Petrov defense, or will he try to go for something else? Before we check out this very nice game, we do have a couple of photos, or again compliments of Niki Riga. So let's check them out. Also, I will use them as a photo challenge. Who is the young gentleman making the first move for Magnus Carlsen? You can see that Carlsen seems very happy with himself, and Caruana perhaps a little bit worried, but most likely not too much, as he already faced this move in this World Chess Championship in Game 2. Also, here we have a very nice photo of Magnus Carlsen high-fiving the young gentleman, and also a very nice photo of Caruana handshaking with the young gentleman. And here we have a photo of them shaking hands. It's unlike for the couple of previous games, we don't have a diagonal handshake. It's a pretty regular handshake, and over them towering Chief Arbiter Lothar Schmidt. Of course, that is not Lothar Schmidt, but I do hope some of you got the joke. So let's check out this very nice game. Like we said, Carlsen has again white pieces for the second game in a row, and he opens with d4. We have knight to f6, knight to f3, d5, c4, and d6, which transpose into the Queen's Gambit declined. And for the time being, we will be following the game that was already played. It was game 2 of this World Chess Championship match, the famous Rook d8 move by Caruana on move 10. Knight to c3, bishop to e7, bishop to f4, we have castles, now comes e3, c5, everything the same as in game 2. D captures on c5, bishop captures on c5, we have queen to c2, knight to c6, a3, and queen to a5. And this is where everyone was really excited. Will we see rook to d1 and rook to d8 again, and Carlsen trying to refute this peculiar idea Caruana brought to the World Chess Championship match, but unfortunately we did not get to see this happen. Here knight to d2 was played. This is Carlsen's improvement on this game, and already we have a surprise for Magnus, as now of course the knight is threatening to come to b3, where both the queen and the bishop would come under attack. Then the other knight would come to a4 with again a double attack against the queen and the bishop, and so on. And here Caruana plays queen to d8, and here Carlsen starts spending time. And I believe he didn't really say it in those exact words in the press conference, but it sounded to me as if he was not prepared for queen to d8, and it's very odd, since there's really not all that much you can do here. There was a move, Hikaru Nakamura, in the Grand Chess Tour in Paris, but it was a rapid game played, the bishop to b4 against Veselin Topalov, and Nakamura was able to win this game. But it's not like bishop to b4 was a super troublesome move for white. After pawn captures, and the knight to b3. Bishop captures on c3 was played with check, pawn captures, and after queen to d8 we continue into this game where white has an isolated a and c pawn, and the game continued where Nakamura won a very nice game. But here Caruana actually just went back with the queen to d8, and now knight to b3 does not come with a double attack. Here Carlsen, after spending some 10 minutes, he decides to go for knight to b3. And again, we have bishop to b6, and this is a move that was never played in this position. There are a couple of moves, games in the database where bishop to e7 was played, but interestingly, in all the games I found that bishop to e7 was played, white won that game. So here, an improvement by Caruana, bishop to b6. Bishop to d6 would come as something like pawn captures on d5. Pawn captures, and after captures rook to d1, then black would have an isolated pawn in the center, and white would just try and keep it there. It's very unlikely that black will be able to push d4 at any point, well, black will basically struggle to keep his d pawn alive for the entire game. So it seems like a reasonable idea after this knight to b3, bishop to b6 by Caruana. But here, as this move was never played, it's hard to say if Carlsen had anything prepared for it. And it seems not, since he spent 10 minutes on knight to b3, and again he spends 13 minutes on this bishop to e2 move. And a lot of people were suggesting that the rook to d1 is a better move, and Carlsen was asked at the press conference later, perhaps did he consider rook to d1, but he said that he decided to go for the this calm option of bishop to e2. Also, there's a very interesting choice maybe of going g4 here, but that could maybe be played in a rapid or a blitz game. Because of course white can look for something if black actually goes for this, but black can simply ignore you and push d4. One of the reasons why rook to d1 there was perhaps a better move. And now after you castle or go rook to d1, let's say you castle queenside, then e5 is coming, and here black would really be better. But okay, like we said, bishop to b6, Carlsen goes bishop to e2, and now we have queen to e7. Caruana simply gets his queen away from the d file, as you know, presumably all the action will happen along the d file when it opens. And here again, a lot of people were expecting rook to d1, but Carlsen actually played bishop to g5. And he did spend, again, some 13 minutes on bishop to g5. But rook to d1 is, again, very interesting. Because after d captures on c4, bishop captures on c4, and rook to d8, now you can castle. And now, after black attacks your bishop with knight to h5, it seems like you don't want to allow such a move. That's why bishop to g5 was perhaps better, not allowing the knight to this free move. But you would actually have rook captures on d8 check. Queen captures rook to d1, attacking the queen. And now it doesn't matter, either the queen will move or you will block with the bishop. But white will get this bishop to d6 move in. And white's dark square bishop will be alright here. So perhaps one of the reasons why Magnus decided to go bishop to g5, not to allow this freeing move. But on the other hand, who knows? We haven't heard this particular idea in the press conference. Bishop to g5 was played, and then we have d captures on c4. On this move, Caruana most likely didn't calculate bishop to g5 before Carlsen actually played it. So here Caruana took 30 minutes, something over half an hour, to make this d captures on c4 move. And okay, we have d captures on c4. And now comes, after some 14 minutes, Carlsen plays knight to d2, which you kind of do have to decide whether you want to capture this immediately. But if you capture it immediately, then you can run into knight to e5. Comes as an attack on the bishop, bishop moves, and now h6. Bishop to h4, and now knight to g6, attacking the bishop. And after bishop to g3, bishop to c7, black would be perfectly fine here. Bishop captures, queen captures, and after white castles, surely white has nothing to claim as advantageous here. So, after this d captures on c4, again Carlsen spends some 14 minutes for this knight to d2 move. According to Sese, it is the correct way to go, to at least try and look for some advantage. And Carlsen would definitely enjoy some advantage, as this is his second game as white. After this game, there are only 5 more games left in classical time format, where Caruana will have 3 whites and 2 blacks. And okay, knight to e5. If you try something like h6 here, for example, h6, then white will capture, for example. Bishop captures on f6, queen captures on f6, and now after knight captures on c4, attacking the bishop, bishop moves. Still, it would be playable, but decides not to go for it. So instead, after knight to d2, knight to e5 is played, and now comes castles by Carlsen. A very interesting move. It's interesting what happens if you try to to collect your gambited pawn right away. If you go knight captures on c4 here, then you get knight captures, and after bishop captures, you will get queen to c5, attacking the undefended bishop on c4. After bishop captures on f6, queen captures on c4, bishop to e5, getting the bishop out of the way, but now comes f6, a very troublesome move. Bishop moves, and now e5 will kind of lock this light square bishop out of the game for the time being. And on the other hand, after knight captures on c4, if knight captures, you could also decide not to capture, for example, on c4, but for example, bishop captures on f6, Then you get knight captures on e3, a very nice in-between move that now, if you capture the black queen, black will capture the white queen with check, so grabbing a pawn on the way. So here, not to lose any pawns, white would have to capture on h7 with check, king captures, and now bishop captures on e7. Knight c2 check, king moves, knight captures on a1, bishop captures on f8, and now after bishop to d7 attacking the bishop here, the bishop will simply move, but all in all, it will be a better position for black. After knight e5, you can't capture just yet. First, Carlsen castles. The bishop is still on b6, so there is a real no danger of bishop d7 or something like b5 to protect this pawn on c4. So we have bishop to d7. Bishop back to f4. Again, if you can recollect it now, but if knight captures on c4 now, knight captures, bishop captures, and now h6. Bishop captures, we have g captures on f6, and after queen to e4, even f5. And after you kick the white queen back, the black queen will now be also very strong. So nothing for white to look for here. So postponing the capture of the gambited pawn for one more move. Bishop to f4, and here Caruana goes knight to g6. Knight to g6 going after the bishop, but there was also a very interesting move, queen to c5. Queen to c5 either guarding the c4 pawn, because now the c4 pawn is guarded twice, and maybe threatening to protect it and even keep it. Maybe white would have to capture the knight here on e5, remove the defender of the c4 pawn, but also in doing so give up the bishop pair. So, for example, bishop captures, queen captures, and only now will you recapture. Knight captures, queen to c7, putting the queen on the same file as the white queen that is undefended on c2, rook a to c1, and here we would have a very nice equalish game. Also possible, but Caruana goes for a different idea. Knight to g6. And okay, the bishop is under attack on f4, you want to move it. Bishop to g3, and now comes the bishop to c6. Caruana's bishops are now excellently placed. This on b6, this on this very strong diagonal eyeing g2, but also this bishop can come at c7 at will. Knight captures on c4. Now capturing on c4 is definitely the way to go. Bishop to c7, and now rook f to d1. It's very hard to find a way to look for advantage here for white other than to immediately occupy the open d file. It's an open file, and there are 4 rooks that are simply waiting to use it. Perhaps not the most creative thing to do, but if you don't do it, your opponent will do it. So rook to d1. We have rook f to d8, and now we have an exchange of rooks. Carlsen places the other rook to d1, and Caruana exchanges the other pair of rooks as well. Rook captures, queen captures, and now comes knight to d5, offering even more trades. Queen to d4, and now knight captures on c3. Queen captures on c3, and now bishop captures on g3. We have h captures on g3, and now queen to d7. Caruana's queen now occupies the only open file on the board, and it's very interesting how will Carlsen go about this. Carlsen plays bishop to d3, eyeing the knight on g6, but also in some variations the bishop will be very strong on this diagonal. Perhaps some threats against the h7 pawn can be made in the future. There was a lot of discussion here after this bishop to d3 move. There is one move that really allows black to pose problems for white, so it's actually bishop to e4. Point being that if you capture the bishop, bishop captures, then queen to d1 will lead to a perpetual check. After king h2, queen h5 check, king goes back, queen d1 check, and here we would have a draw by repetition. But after this bishop to e4 move, white also has the option of playing knight to e5. And here there are some lines that would be possible. For example, if knight captures on e5, queen captures, now f5, with again an equalish game. It's hard to say if white could actually make something happen after this f5 move, but also after bishop to e4, knight e5, you could have this queen d8, simply waiting to see what happens. And now after f3, kicking the bishop back, bishop captures, knight captures, and we would again have this endgame with a queen and the knight against the queen and the knight, where white's pawn structure is a bit, drafty in front of the white king, but not sure if this would be such a disadvantage. So all in all, again, even if not going for the perpetual, would be an equalish endgame. But okay, after bishop to d3, b6 is played by Caruana, and now Carlsen plays f3, not allowing any tricks with giving up the bishop and then going for this perpetual. The diagonal closes, and Carlsen shows that he's definitely ready to play this out. Bishop to b7, not allowing any knight to e5 ideas to come with an attack against the bishop and the queen, and also preparing bishop to a6 in some lines. Bishop captures on g6, we have pawn captures, and now comes e4. And a lot of people were saying that this is definitely an advantage for Carlsen, because now it's a queen and the knight against a queen and the bishop. And a queen and the knight usually will have a lot more coordination than a queen and the bishop. Of course, there are exceptions to this rule, but Carlsen's plan is to push this pawn all the way to e5 and to use the d6 square, that is a dark square, as an outpost for his very strong knights, even if the queens are exchanged off the board. Here, queen to c7, a very nice move by Caruana that, eyes to exchange the queen, also is attacking the g3 pawn, and with bishop to a6, as this was a plan with bishop to b7, is threatening to exchange queens. Here we have, if queen to d1, not really anything to look forward to, as the king can simply move back and there are no more tricks here. So after this e4 move, queen to c7, also attacking the g3 pawn, but here Carlsen simply plays e5 as planned. He wants to create a very nice outpost for his knight on d6, but also a very interesting reply to queen to c7 would have been queen to d4, which again comes as a very strong line. Now queen captures on g3 is met with queen to d8 check. King moves, and now comes knight to d6, attacking both the bishop on b7 and the pawn on f7. And after queen to e1 check, king to h2, now there's no perpetual here because the h4 square is covered by the white queen here. Now you would have to play f6, so the white queen is no longer guarding the h4 square, but now you're also no longer in control of your bishop on b7. So now we would simply have knight captures, and again we would have this perpetual. So a bit of a longer line, but Carlsen doesn't go into it. After queen to c7, he simply decides to push e5. He actually wants to trade the queens off the board and try to look for advantage in a knight versus bishop endgame. Queen to c5 check. King to h2, and now comes the bishop to a6. Now, as the knight is attacked twice, you can either defend it with b3, or as the pawns will get separated, there's really no point in doing so. Simply knight to d6 immediately. Queen captures, pawn captures on c3, and now comes f6, trying to challenge this outpost of the knight on d6. Carlsen simply protects it with f4, and king to f8. Caruana is now preparing to bring his king into the game, and Carlsen does the same. We have king to g1, king to e7, and now king to f2. We have king to d7, and now comes king to e3. Instead of king to e3, an interesting option would have been c4, but it doesn't do all that much. For now, you can see that the c4 pawn and the knight really control this bishop on a6. The bishop really has nowhere to go. But after something like captures, and king to d6, king to c6, now you can approach with the white king as well. King e3, g5 now, and now king to f3. If you go for the pawns on the king side, you will actually lose this endgame because black will be much faster due to having two pawns connected to two pawns. For example, king attacks the c pawn, and now if you start collecting the pawns on the king side, black will simply be much faster after those pawns start rolling down the board. The black pawn will queen much faster. So after this g5, you will not be able to go for the king side pawns, rather you will have to go for king to d4. And now after bishop to b7, knight e8 attacking the g7 pawn, pawn g6, the knight goes back, a5, and now you will be able to exchange here, and after a couple of exchanges you will not be able to even push c5 here. Because if you allow c5 and b5, then black is the one who will actually be winning. But here you can see that black has all of the squares covered, and the white king has no way of even approaching the position. So basically it would be a draw. So here Carlsen decides to go immediately for king to e3, but now Caruana simply attacks it with bishop to f1. The g2 pawn is under attack. Carlsen goes back to defend it. Caruana simply repeats bishop to a6, we have king to e3, bishop to f1, and here Carlsen makes his 40th move, so basically he did reach time control, king to f2, he offered a draw here, and a draw was agreed upon, before Caruana even made his 40th move. But yeah, game 7, not something to be proud of with the white pieces, I guess. I mean, it's hard to say not to be proud of a draw against a 2800 plus opponent, but still it's very weird, especially because of this early moment in the game. Okay, Carlsen did deviate from game 2 after this queen a5. He deviated with knight to d2, but then queen to d8 is a move that, well, I have no idea for sure, but you know, if you've listened to the press conference, it seems that he wasn't really prepared for it. So, and as there aren't all that many replies black can make, queen d8 should have been something maybe Carlsen should have blitzed his response immediately out to. But again, it's hard to say. There are so many branches and so many supercomputer lines that I guess it's you just don't expect a move like queen to d8. And obviously, Fabi was very much prepared for this knight to d2 deviation. It's not like he thought. Obviously, he didn't think that Carlsen would actually prepare something for the rook d8 line. But yeah, you know, very exciting lines, very exciting times to be, you know, watching these supercomputer preparation lines, and it will be very interesting to see how the rest of this World Chess Championship match will unfold. We have 5 more games. Like we said, Caruana will be having the white pieces in 3 more games, and Carlsen will only have the white pieces twice. Again, is this a plus for Carlsen? Is this a plus for Caruana? 2 years ago in New York against Karyakin, Carlsen, it was actually in game 8 that Carlsen tried it, to push too much and win a position that was just unwinnable, and in the end ended up losing it. So will Carlsen manage to just draw out all the other games up until game 12 and then finally go into rapids? But what will that mean for chess? I mean, in New York, the classic World Chess Championship was decided in faster time controls, and if we will here also have a decision about who the next World Chess Champion will be, not in the classical time control, but rather in rapids or even Armageddon, then you know, definitely. Or maybe they should do something about the whole approach to the classical World Chess Championship. It's quite strange, or even just make it like it was before. You know, if the challenger doesn't at least win a game, or if the score at the end of the match is not in his favor, then the champion keeps his title, I guess. I don't know. So perhaps he has to prepare some sharper lines. But I don't know if this will be a good way to keep the classical time format going. So yeah, but as always, I'm very interested in what are your thoughts. What do you think? Is this going Carlsen's way? Is this going Caruana's way? We still have 5 more games to go, and a lot more is there to happen. I would like to thank Dan Hansen, Paul Darga, Carmen Maris, Gregory Castlering, and Rurik Oprita for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, hopefully with some more interesting content, maybe even mix it up before the next World Chess Championship game. Thank you all, and I will see you soon.